Hello, welcome to 8.9 News. I'm ffinlo Costain. Landscape Enterprise Networks' 3 Keels Lens programme has announced a new phase of rapid scaling to the programme, which is already helping to boost the health and resilience of landscapes across the UK and Europe. I spoke to Donald Lunan, the interim chief executive of Lens, and I asked him why Lens puts the emphasis on landscapes rather than on individual farms.
So we recognise that the challenges that we have and face are beyond single farms. So Lens was born out of the recognition that there were gains to be made from broad collaborations, that to fix the problems within our landscapes, the impacts of climate change, of biodiversity loss, water quality and quantity issues, and we needed to think big, that working at individual farm level was not going to result in sustainable change at the scale that was required. And so by bringing actors together, all of whom are dependent on landscapes for their well-being, helps to address those collective risks. Now, obviously, landscapes are made up of hundreds of individual farms, so we cannot lose that. And we're working with the individual farms and clusters of farms, but it's how those farms interact with the wider landscape and how supporting the many individuals to take progressive steps, some large steps, some small steps, but at a wider scale is more impactful than engaging in individual farms or in a single crop or commodity supply chain.
Can you help me out with the definition of landscape, Donald? Is a landscape just everything that you can see from a particular point, or is it more specifically defined than that?
So our definition of landscape is quite broad, and it can be defined by actors that we're working with in a specific region. It can be defined by particular catchments or other landscape features. So it's quite broad. But what we're aiming to do is work at scale. So looking at what we can do within a region and how we can make it more resilient.
And how does Lens actually work to deliver more resilient landscapes?
So firstly, we recognise that currently there's many different drivers for action. So particularly with the private sector, there's a huge focus on Scope 3 emissions, for instance. But there's other drivers for the partners that we work with, such as biodiversity, which is increasingly going up the agenda, but also water quality or flood mitigation. And we know that to deliver on these somewhat diverse objectives, we need to address many of the issues that result from a failing landscape. And so within Lens, we look to address 5 vital signs, as we call them: healthier soils with a balanced nutrient budget, reducing fossil fuel-based inputs, increasing water resilience, increasing resilience to pests and diseases, and improving livelihoods and well-being. And we think by taking a more holistic approach, we seek to underpin our work with a much stronger and, we believe, much more sustainable definition of resilience. If the landscapes that we're working in are seeing these 5 vital signs improving, then we're starting to build a more robust and vibrant system that will be resilient to the impacts that we all know are going to come, sadly. Secondly, we also help build resilience by working with broad partnerships. So we engage a range of organisations from the private, from the public, and from the third sectors, along with farms that are both large and small. And this diversity in our network helps also to build resilience. Things change. Elections are held, feels very pertinent this week. Economies grow and retract, customers' preferences change. But by having a diverse partnership, it makes us more resilient to those changes as well. And different partners on the demand side also help. It allows us to work with a broader range of farmers, not just those that are supplying into specific supply chains, but also those that sit within specific river catchments, for instance, or landholders that are adjacent to important infrastructure or key assets. And so that enables us to work across the landscape, and engaging with different types of farms, different land holdings, also helps to bring greater resilience to those landscapes.
And obviously Lens has been very successful. So how are you planning to scale the Lens programme?
So in each of the landscapes that we're working in, we know that there's more that we can do. There's more partners that are dependent on that landscape that we can bring in and be part of the Lens. And we also know that there's more farmers as well that are keen to make the transition to more regenerative approaches to reduce inputs, to reduce soil disturbance, improve soil health, and create more space for nature. So we work with our partners to identify more landscapes to work in as well. We will be starting our 6th landscape this year in Scotland. That's our 6th landscape, not a 6th landscape in Scotland. And we're in discussions with a number of other locations in Europe, but also beyond. So we've had conversations in the Americas, in Africa, and South and Southeast Asia. Lens is a hugely adaptive model. It works with small producers in the hills of northern Italy just as effectively as it does with large arable holdings in the east of England. It's about identifying those shared risks and opportunities and then creating the space for active collaboration. And I think we also appreciate the scale of the task. The now somewhat distant target of keeping us within 1.5 degrees of warming required 40% of agricultural land to be regenerative by the end of the decade. We're way off that. And so we know that there's work to do. And as companies, governments, societies recognize those risks and how they're manifesting in the supply chains and investments and infrastructure, we know we need to move quicker and at scale. So, recently what we've been doing a huge amount of work strengthening our processes to ensure that access to lens is easy and straightforward, and that we're focusing on efficiency and impact to maximize the value for money proposition. And we're engaging with multiple partners to crowd into our existing lenses and establish new ones. We know from experience that once we get started, we grow rapidly. So, as you indicated, we have been successful. We double in size almost every year, both in terms of the regions we're working in, but as a collective as well. And we're entering into active discussions with the finance sector, particularly around investments and insurance, and also on the policy side. We know that further blending of public and private finance, which we do a lot of on Lens already, but how can we do that better? How can we really contribute to that collective action?
Now, regenerative agriculture is context-specific principles rather than practices. How do you maintain the integrity of that context-specific approach at a farm or landscape level when you're working through long supply chains and with large multinationals?
That's a great question. So every lens is very much place-based. We understand the risks and the opportunities within that landscape and work with partners there to deliver change. So yes, we work with some of the biggest companies in the world who, I should stress, have been hugely supportive of our ambition. And often it's with them that we're identifying the new landscapes that we want to work in, key supply and sourcing regions for those organizations. But then our work is to identify other actors within that landscape, who else is dependent on that landscape for their success. And water companies is a great example, actually very dependent on the health of the landscape and the quality and quantity of water that is coming off the land. But are not interested in individual supply chains, for instance. We also work with local governments who might be worried about flood risk or biodiversity loss. We work with retailers who often have a very different relationship with regions that food and drink manufacturers have. And we work with grain aggregators and other supply chain actors. We work closely with farmers and land managers in the organizations that represent them. So in each region, while we have the regenerative agricultural principles, as you allude to, we work with our local partners and our delivery team to translate those into region-specific interventions. So, of course, there'll be some commonality between landscapes. Those broad regenerative approaches around introduction of landscape livestock into arable systems or reducing tillage. But what these actually look like at an individual farm level will be very much dependent on the farmer themselves. They have a huge amount of agency to determine what happens on their farm and what doesn't happen. And so at the very heart of Lens is a place-based approach. It wouldn't work without that. And we see Lens as a common platform that allows the facilitation of action, but the regions, the landscapes themselves is where the magic happens.
A key opportunity for scaling regenerative agriculture is to demonstrate to farmers that they can become more financially resilient. Does Lens take a view as to how that resilience can best be achieved?
Yeah, so what we seek to do through Lens and through the transition to regenerative approaches is to make the farm financial model more stable. So with a more resilient and robust system, we seek to remove the peaks and troughs that farmers experience, the good years and the bad years. But our view of resilience is a little bit more holistic than just the financial model, although obviously that's critical. So supporting the farmer in transition from conventional to regenerative approaches requires investment, and we also want to see the farmers supported to maintain that transition. We don't want stalling or backsliding, and that's an important element of the new process that we're currently rolling out this year, taking a slightly longer term view on the regenerative pathway and how we can support farmers along that transition, but also to keep that level of ambition and innovation that will continue to build resilience and can be shared across the farmer networks. But we also want to see how that wider system supports farming, becomes more resilient, so creating jobs and enterprises within the rural sector that support the regenerative approach. A real risk is that farmers stop farming. I saw a report this week that suggested the numbers of farms in the EU has dropped by over 30% since the start of the century due to economic and environmental constraints. We need to arrest that decline if we want to ensure that people have good quality and affordable food. And of course, from a Lens perspective, we need to ensure that that food is produced and it's benefiting the soils, it's benefiting biodiversity, and it's helping to both mitigate and adapt to climate change. We all depend on our landscapes for food, for water, for biodiversity, for recreation. So we all win if we can make our landscapes resilient and healthy.
That was Donald Lunan from Lens. More news as ever on our website 8.9.com. That's all for now. We're back soon. Thanks for watching.